To order. Welcome to meeting number 20 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Friday, April 8, 2022, the committee is meeting to study competitiveness and small and medium-sized enterprises. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Those here in Ottawa, you know the health rules in place, so govern yourselves accordingly. And speaking of which, it's our first meeting as a committee, if I'm not mistaken, where we have witnesses present with us in Ottawa. So we're very happy to have you. Thank you very much. Yes, it's really great. So much appreciated, and we also appreciate our witnesses with us via Zoom today. So without further ado, we have from Beer Canada, Luke Chapman, Vice President, Federal Affairs. From the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, we have Mark Agnew, Senior Vice President, Policy and Government Relations. Aladrigola Burke, Senior Director, Parliamentary Affairs and Small and Medium Enterprises Policy. From the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, we have Corinne Pullman, Senior Vice President, National Affairs and Partnership. From the Quebec Council of Employers, Mr. Carl Blackburn, President and Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Blackburn. And Denis Hamel, Vice President, Workforce Development Policies. And finally, from Vivek Research, Robin Chaban, Senior Economist, who's probably going to be able to join us a little later. Donc, merci à tous nos témoins d'être.
So thank you to all our witnesses for coming here. We'll begin with Mr. Chapman, who is here with us in Ottawa. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Is my mic on? Yeah, you guys can hear? Okay. Okay, Mr. Chairman, honorable members, thank you for the invitation to appear this afternoon as part of the committee's study on the labor shortages and productivity of Canadian small and medium-sized enterprises. My name is Luke Chapman. I'm VP Federal Affairs for Beer Canada, which is a national trade association comprised of 48 member brewing companies that account for 90% of the beer produced in this country. We are the sole national inclusive association representing Canadian brewers of all sizes in all regions. Our member brewing companies are heavily invested in Canada. Over 85% of the beer sold here is made here by Canadian workers, using Canadian-grown agricultural ingredients. Prior to the pandemic, brewers directly employed nearly 19,000 Canadians in the production and sale of beer, supported 149,000 Canadian jobs. From the Western Canadian farmer growing the high-quality malt barley required to produce beer, the many businesses along the supply chain, including packaging and label manufacturers, to the restaurant staff that serve our beers to millions of adult drinkers across Canada. Most of the well over 1,200 breweries operating in Canada are small, local, family-owned, and entrepreneurial businesses. For many of these smallest producers that depend on their on-site tap rooms for sales, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic was especially difficult. Since early 2020, brewers of all sizes across Canada have been on a roller coaster ride. In a typical year, more than 20% of all beer in Canada is sold and consumed at restaurants, bars, festivals, concerts, and other social events. With the restrictions placed on these occasions, brewers had to adjust their business models to respond to a new reality. First, by producing hand sanitizers, and then by shifting to canned beer production for home consumption. Unfortunately, a temporary uptick in packaged beer sales for home consumption has not been enough to offset the drastic decline in draft beer typically sold in restaurants, bars, and other venues. As a result, in the past 2 years, total beer sales in Canada have declined by nearly 4%, or put another way, a decline equivalent to nearly 460 million less cans of beer sold in just a 2-year period. As brewers and our partners in the hospitality sector look to emerge and recover from the impacts of the pandemic, supply chain disruptions and delays are contributing to rising production costs, including historically high prices for key ingredients like barley and other cereal grains, as well as packaging materials, including cans and bottles. Already high, malted barley prices have jumped another $40 to $45 per ton. Similarly, aluminum can prices are up 25 to 30% since the beginning of the year, with suppliers requesting exponentially larger minimum order sizes and order lead times. Despite mitigation efforts by brewers, Canadian consumers and businesses that depend on beer sales for revenue, like restaurants and bars, are already experiencing the effects of the rising beer production costs, as retail beer prices have increased by 5% so far in 2022, alongside rising fuel and labor costs. And new costs are on their way, including an estimated $75 million in industry-wide capital investments needed to respond to the government's ban on certain single-use plastics. Specifically for our industry, the replacement of plastic ring carriers with alternative packaging types. The Canadian brewing industry is fully committed to doing its part to support the government's effort to eliminate plastic waste, but brewers are being told to expect delays in purchase and installation of the required new equipment due to global supply chain bottlenecks. It is imperative that the government accounts for these costs and challenges in finalizing its regulations banning certain single-use plastics by providing brewers with sufficient time, ideally 3 years, to make the transition. While some of these challenges facing brewing companies are outside the control of a national government like Canada's, in our view, it is also imperative that the government does not further contribute to the problem. In this respect, increases in federal beer excise duties in April 2020, 2021, and 2022 that were allowed to proceed were counterproductive and harmful, as brewers and our customers in the restaurant and bar business were struggling to keep their businesses afloat. And because these annual increases are automatically indexed to inflation, brewers and our partners in the restaurant and bar business are looking at a federal beer tax increase that could be as high as 6 to 7% next April, which represents an estimated $50 million in new beer taxes in just a one-year period. This automatic approach to taxation is simply not sustainable over the long term. As a case in point, from 2017 to 2021, the federal government's excise duty revenues from beer grew by 24%, according to the Public Accounts of Canada, during a period where beer sales declined by 6.5%. Given these circumstances, we are requesting this committee recommend the repeal of the automatic annual increases to beer excise duty rates that are being imposed without any debate or vote by members of Parliament. Eliminating future automatic annual federal beer tax increases will provide Canadian brewers of all sizes with much-needed additional cash flow to respond to the operational and market challenges at a critical time for the industry. Thank you for your time and considering our comments. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Chapman. Je passerai maintenant la...
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Mr. Agnew and Ms. Burke from the Chamber of Commerce.
Well, good afternoon, Chair and honorable members. It's a pleasure to be here as part of the committee's comprehensive study on small and medium-sized enterprise issues, and I'll split my time, as the Chair identified, with my colleague, Ala, who's joined me virtually as well. I think it goes without saying that this study has come at a critical time for small and medium-sized businesses, which, I mean, as many of the members will know, are engines of job creation in communities both large and small all across the country. But despite the important role that SMEs play in the economy, it nonetheless has been a very challenging period for them, whether we're talking about labor shortages, supply chain disruptions, debt management issues, and sort of the looming threat of cybersecurity concerns, certainly. These challenges, I think, stem from both, it's fair to say, the direct impacts of the pandemic, but also pre-existing structural challenges that existed within the Canadian and global economies beforehand. As certainly, the economy that was not always the most conducive to business investment before the pandemic and, created difficulties for SMEs has only unfortunately compounded those problems now with, I think, the added challenges, fair to say, of debt management challenges for those businesses. We need tangible solutions for the business community, and I do want to pick up on a few of those themes that have been identified in the committee's motion to begin this study. The first one that I do want to speak to briefly is competition policy. The Chamber supports efforts to ensure that Canada's competition policy is updated for the 21st century. However, certainly we're of the view that the government needs to launch a comprehensive multi-stakeholder modernization process to engage the full suite of competition policy issues and put those on the table for consideration. And certainly the drip feed approach of having issues come out and being changed is not going to be one that's conducive for the business community and sort of understanding what the legal framework is and the competition policy landscape. There's a number of changes in the Budget Implementation Act. We've begun to hear from our members about those and what it means for them. And certainly we would argue that an omnibus legislative approach is perhaps not the best vehicle for undertaking those changes to the Competition Act. There's a number of things that you could talk about in the Act, but two of which I would sort of initially put forward for this committee's awareness would be one, around the private right of access, and certainly ensuring that there's no proliferation of frivolous cases that could be brought forward perhaps by strategic reasons for competitors. As well as that, there's the changes that have been made to the administrative monetary penalties, which represent a fairly quantum leap in their severity, and which may, I think, pose a chilling impact potentially on business investment in Canada. And instead, we need to perhaps look at how more weight can be put on a proportional approach to how those fines are assessed on companies. Competition Act changes are not going to be what makes a difference at the end of the day in this inflationary environment, and we need to make sure that there's no knee-jerk reactions to how we go about updating Canada's competition, policy. It is a fairly critical piece of legislation for Canadian businesses, both large and small, and across many sectors of the economy that impacts the business environment in a very real way. I'll now turn to my colleague Al to talk about some of the other changes that we'd like to put forward for the committee's consideration.
Thank you, Mark. Committee members, it's great to be here with you today. While there has understandably been much focus on the effects of long COVID on the health of Canadians, today I would like to discuss the impact that financial long COVID has had on Canadian businesses. Just like its medical counterpart, there is no short-term answer or looming relief, and small businesses in particular will take longer to recover. They have fewer resources, higher levels of pandemic debt, and increased labor challenges. To allow small businesses to begin to recover, introducing small business-friendly measures is a necessary government action moving forward. These should include tax write-offs for
Ces mesures devraient inclure des déductions fiscales pour les investissements.
Sorry, not sure that was in French. Can I continue?
Yes, I
Yes?
think yes,
Okay.
you may continue. Maybe would it be possible to bring your the boom of your microphone a little up? I think it.
Up?
Yeah.
Like this?
Yeah,
Okay.
perfect.
Thanks. To allow small businesses to begin to recover, introducing small business-friendly measures is a necessary government action moving forward. These should include tax write-offs for cybersecurity investment, waiving interest on all government-backed pandemic loans, including CEBA, BCAP, and HASCAP, and encouraging domestic travel through new tax incentives on domestic tourism, travel, and hospitality activities. Next, we need to build a strong labor force that works for the Canadian economy. Simply put, Canada does not have enough workers to keep up with demand, and the structural labor deficit has no short-term fix. The solution has to include elements such as reskilling and upskilling, but can also include more immediate solutions, such as a streamlined temporary foreign workers program, a decrease in our refugee and immigration processing times, and making it easier for internationally trained professionals to have their credentials recognized in Canada. Finally, the government can ensure that small businesses have the tools for success through prioritizing the introduction and passage of severely needed updated privacy legislation. While the original version of the Digital Charter Implementation Act introduced in the previous Parliament was not perfect, outdated legislation risks holding Canadian businesses back amongst our international peers. It also encourages a patchwork approach at the subnational level. As much as we all want to bounce back quickly, the road to recovery is a long one, and made even longer by the lingering impacts of financial long COVID on small businesses. Thank you, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Burke. And Mr. Agnew will now go to Madam Pullman from CFIB.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. CFIB is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization that represents 95,000 small and medium-sized businesses across Canada. We're also a research-based organization, and we take our direction from our members through surveys, and we conduct them on a regular basis. And I want to share with you today a bit of a deck that I hope was sent around to most of you, all of you today, that I'm going to walk you through that will share some of that research with you. First, as you may see on slide 3, we found that only 42% of small businesses are back to normal sales, 35% have no pandemic debt, and just 18% feel they've recovered from pandemic stress. For many smaller businesses, the pandemic is far from over. And we need governments to continue to recognize that smaller businesses have been and continue to be among the hardest hit. While it is good news that restrictions have lifted, many are now facing other challenges, which has already been cited today. As you can see on slide 4, the biggest impacts right now are rising prices, supply chain challenges, increasing government costs, and labor shortages. I'm going to touch on the impact of each of these and then share some recommendations at the end. First, over 90% report that their costs have increased substantially since the pandemic began, and more than 3/4 think this will not be a temporary issue, as you can see on slide 5. The costs that are having the biggest impact right now are fuel and energy costs, followed by wage costs, insurance, taxes and regulatory costs, and product input costs. While fuel costs have been going up more generally, so has the carbon tax, which is having a significant impact on many small firms. It's important to keep in mind that the federal carbon backstop has had a disproportionate impact on small businesses, a fact also recognized in a recent report by the Federal Environment Commissioner. We estimate that small businesses pay approximately 45 to 50% of the federal carbon backstop, and only 8 to 10% is returned to them in the form of programs which have never been accessible or available to smaller companies. Next, another significant impact, of course, is labor shortages, as you can see on slide 7. More than 1 in 2 are affected by labor shortages, but this grows to almost 2 in 3 in Quebec and almost 3 in 4 businesses in the construction sector. Now, there are many ways that small businesses have tried to address the shortage of labor, but some have proven to be more effective than others. You can see this on slide 8. For example, 33% of small businesses have invested in automation, And 81% of those folks found it to be effective in helping them address their labor shortages. Similarly, about 16% have used the temporary foreign worker program, but more than half found it to be useful in addressing their labor shortages. Those were the two most effective methods small businesses have used, more effective than increasing wages or bringing more flexible hours to their employees. Another big challenge is supply chain. As you can see on slide 9, product distribution constraints were relatively stable between 2010 and 2020, with only about 8% of small businesses on average having to deal with it. However, this started to shift when the pandemic hit, jumping to 18% by April 2020 and reaching as high as 28% this past February. To respond, 84% have had to increase prices to absorb their increased cost, 79% have had to deal with delays in receiving shipments, and 1 in 2 have had to increase the cost of shipping goods to their customers. Particularly worrisome is that more than 1 in 5 have had to turn down sales or contracts due to a supply chain issue. Finally, before I get to recommendations, I did want to touch on regulations and red tape. Our most recent research found that regulations cost Canadian businesses about $40 billion per year, $11.3 billion of which is considered red tape. That is unnecessary, duplicative, or redundant regulations. As you can see on slide 11, the regulatory costs have a disproportionate impact on the smallest businesses, with costs being almost 7 times higher per employee when compared to the largest businesses. But regulations not only have an economic impact, but a social impact as well, as you can see on slide 12. Almost 90% said that excessive regulations add significant stress to their lives, and almost 2/3 would not advise their children to start a business given the burden of regulations. So despite the lifting of pandemic restrictions, many small businesses continue to struggle as they face rising prices, supply chain challenges, and labor shortages. About 2/3 still have, on average, about $160,000 in pandemic-related debt, just as the last of the government-related COVID supports shut down on May 7th. On the last 2 slides, you'll see a series of recommendations. I'm going to include a few here, though. First of all, we would suggest the government could put a moratorium on any costs to small businesses, that is, maybe a freeze on CPP or EI or carbon tax for the moment, or offset those costs by introducing rebates for small businesses. Lower credit card merchant fees is another way, as promised in Budget 21 and in 22. Help the hardest hit small businesses deal with their debt by increasing the forgivable portion of their CEBA loans to 50% and extending the deadline to repay. To help with labor shortages, create a pathway to permanent residency for temporary foreign workers, provide tax credits that help stimulate automation, or quickly pass legislation to advance the immediate expensing as promised in Budget 2021. You could introduce a payroll tax credit for new hires to offset the costs of training. And to address red tape, we believe a policy of mutual recognition between all provinces could improve the flow of trade within Canada, and that the federal government could play a pivotal role in making that happen. And improving the one-for-one rule within the Red Tape Reduction Act so that it applies not only to regulations but to legislation and policies as well. I'll leave it there, but there are many other recommendations I encourage you to take a look at, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Pollmann. Je passerai maintenant
Thank you, Ms. Pullman. I now give the floor to Mr. Blackburn and Mr. Hamel of the Quebec Council of Employers. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Carl Blackburn. I'm President and CEO of the Conseil du Patronat du Québec. I'm accompanied by Denis Hamel, Vice President, Labour Force Development Policies. I'm an entrepreneur, son of an entrepreneur and grandson of an entrepreneur. Our organization, created in 1969, is a confederation of nearly 100 sectoral associations and several corporate members that represents the interest of more than 70,000 employers of all sizes in all regions of Quebec, from private and parapublic sectors. The labor shortage is undoubtedly the major problem facing employers. More than 6% of positions are currently vacant in Quebec. And to show the magnitude of the problem, there are more vacant positions in our provinces than there are employment insurance recipients. In a recent survey of our members, 94% of them consider that they are currently facing a labor hiring issue, and nearly 9 out of 10 employers are concerned about the effects of the labor shortage on the quality, price, and availability of the goods and service they offer, with good reason. Several recent studies show the strong negative economic impact of the labor crisis and the high number of vacant positions. Contracts are turned down. Products and services are dropped. Production is relocated outside the country. Investments postponed. Their competitiveness is reduced. There's a deterioration of the quality of products or services, loss of revenue for government, and so on. We're losing billions of dollars. For example, for the Quebec manufacturing sector alone, which represents 13.5% of the province's GDP, our colleagues at Manufacturiers Exportateurs du Québec have estimated the losses due to the lack of labor at $18 billion over the past 2 years. I can't imagine what that loss would be for the country as a whole. Because of our demographics, we know that this shortage will continue until the end of the decade. The 2021 census data released by Statistics Canada last week confirms that Canada's working age population has never been older, with more than 1 in 5, 21.8%, aged 55 to 64. This age group is more numerous than young adults aged 15 to 24. This large group of workers will retire by 2030, exacerbating the labor shortage. There's an urgent need to act now, as our prosperity is being hampered by labor shortages. Employers are already deploying a number of solutions, but to no avail, raising wages, adding benefits, hiring bonuses, including creative social activities, and pursuing telecommuting to expand the pool of potential employees. Nevertheless, the number of job vacancies in Canada has doubled in 1 year, from 560,000 in the fourth quarter of 2020 to over 915,000 by the end of 2021. The labor shortage is an issue that affects all provinces and all economic sectors. It's a real crisis in construction, manufacturing, retail trade, healthcare, accommodation, and food services, which account for more than half of the total number of vacancies. This is just not a problem for employers. Employees are also suffering, as labor shortages means overwork and having to forgo holidays or training for the Canadian public too. Labor shortages mean disruptions in services, delays in obtaining goods and services, closed restaurants, and hotels operating at half capacity. No one wins from labor shortages. On a positive note, labor shortages should be an opportunity for businesses to adopt new solutions to support their long-term growth and productivity. And I'm thinking particularly of the adoption of new technologies, automation, and the development and integration of green technologies. But making this shift requires increasingly skilled employees who, unfortunately, are not available. In August 2021, we proposed 10 solutions to the labor shortage because there is no single solution to this issue. We called on labor market stakeholders to work together to come up with concrete short-term solutions to improve workers' literacy and numeracy levels, increase in-company training, particularly through the employment insurance system, attract and retain experienced workers, support employers in their shift towards diversity, and modernize immigration programs to adapt them to this new reality. We welcome the progress already made by the federal government, particularly in the area of immigration, but the numbers speak for themselves. This crisis is not over, and we must not give up. We need to work collectively to find solutions as soon as possible. It is now my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to be available to the committee member to answer their questions. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. And we have Robin Chaban from Vivek Research.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee. I appreciate the invitation to be here today. My name is Robin Chaban, and I'm the senior economist at Vivek Research, an economic consulting firm, and I'm also a researcher on competition policy in Canada. The focus of my contribution today is to discuss current debates on the purpose of the Competition Act as it relates to SMEs. This debate is highly relevant given the announced review of the Competition Act. The purpose statement of the Act, which is Section 1.1, states that the aim of the law is to maintain and encourage competition in Canada, to 1, promote the efficiency and adaptability of the Canadian economy, 2, to expand opportunities for Canadian participation in world markets, while at the same time recognizing the role of foreign competition in Canada. 3, to ensure that small and medium-sized enterprises have an equitable opportunity to participate in the Canadian economy. And 4th, to provide consumers with competitive prices and product choices. The question of what the stated purpose of the Act ought to be is critical for 2 main reasons. First, from a legal perspective, the purpose statement of the Act shapes how the Competition Tribunal and courts adjudicate competition cases. The purpose statement of the Act determines which competitive harms are considered under the law. The second reason the purpose statement is so critical is because it articulates the guiding rationale for the Competition Act. The stated purpose of the legislation guides policymakers on what should be included in the legislation. Some have argued that the purpose statement of the Act should be changed so that our competition law's only objective is to promote efficiency in the Canadian economy, and that it should not have any particular regard for SMEs or other stakeholders for that matter. A notable example of this argument is put forward by Professor Edward Iacobucci in a paper commissioned by Senator Whetstone, which was part of a broader consultation on competition law reform. Professor Iacobucci argues that having multiple objectives for competition law, like creating equitable opportunities for SMEs to compete, while also promoting economic efficiency, creates complications in the application of the law, since objectives may conflict with each other. Professor Iacobucci's solution to this problem is to have the government make economic efficiency the only concern of competition law. In the Canadian context, efficiency has often been used to justify the law's permissiveness of market power and dominance, which can be detrimental to SMEs that are striving to break into new markets. The argument goes that other benefits that competition law can provide, like ensuring equitable opportunities for SMEs to participate in markets, should be the responsibility of other policy areas. While this approach may be an elegant technical solution from a legal perspective, it sidesteps the root of the issue, which is that competition policy is inherently political. Different stakeholders will inevitably have different preferences for the law. Ignoring this reality doesn't make it go away. Rather, it creates a broader economic policy framework that works against itself. If the government followed Professor Iacobucci's advice, on the one hand, we would have a competition law that promotes economic efficiency without regard for, and potentially to the detriment to, SMEs. On the other hand, we have ISED spending billions to support SMEs. How much further could those dollars go if we had a competition law that supports SMEs rather than ignoring or working against them? Even with the competition law we have today, there is scope to do more to support SMEs. I and some colleagues, Vas Bednar and Anna Corey, recently prepared a report for ISED which outlines opportunities for reform of the Competition Act that would benefit SMEs. Extending the timeline the Bureau has to review mergers after they have closed would enable it to rectify so-called killer acquisitions, whereby incumbents buy out new entrants that may become competitors in the future. In the report, we also recommend making changes to how anti-competitive conduct is evaluated under the law, adopting a more rules-based approach that would be more predictable to implement and potentially allow the Bureau to block anti-competitive behaviors more successfully. Competition law should aim to promote fair commerce in the Canadian economy by acknowledging and balancing the needs of all stakeholders, including SMEs, large businesses, consumers, workers, government, and citizens in general. It's through the balancing of these needs that we derive the modern purpose of the Competition Act, and also ensure that the Act works with, not against, the policies we currently have in place to foster fair and competitive markets in Canada. Thank you again, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Merci beaucoup pour vos remarques, très appréciées. Donc, on est prêt.
Thank you for your remarks. We'll begin our first round of questions. Mrs. Gray, 6 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. My first questions will be for Beer Canada, and I really appreciate your comments on how the escalator excise tax is going to be affecting your industry. But I wanted to ask you, now with inflation, I wanted to touch on the cost of shipping and transportation and how this is affecting your industry.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, and it's certainly a challenge. As I noted in my remarks, in early 2022, beer prices have already increased by 5% compared to the same period in 2021. So it's certainly a combination of things. We're dealing with historically high malt barley prices, historically high aluminum can prices, as well as getting close to historically high fuel prices, as well as rising labor costs. So it's a perfect storm. And then to put on top of that these annual federal beer tax increases, and it's been a very challenging time for brewers across the country. And I think the message that we're trying to send to the government today and throughout the coming months is that there's an idea around consistent small increases every year, but I think we can all agree that this is far from normal circumstances when you're dealing with 6 to 7% inflation. So we're asking the government to acknowledge that there's already a lot of stuff happening in our industry and to maybe take a second look at these annual increases moving forward, leading up to April 1st, 2023. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. The next thing I wanted to ask you about was about interprovincial trade and about reducing red tape. We know that there is a lot of restrictions in Canada, and there's a lot of inability for people to ship across provinces. So I'm just wondering how important it is, from your perspective, for the federal government to get to the table to remove some of these interprovincial trade barriers.
Yeah, absolutely. We at Beer Canada, our member companies, are fully supportive of the elimination of barriers that make it difficult to move our products from province to province. I think beer is unique in many ways, and it's also unique in its physical characteristics when you compare it to both wine and spirits. Beer is a much more bulkier, heavier product, so it is more costly to ship between provinces. But we, as an industry, are certainly supportive of the government doing what it can, the federal government, to work with the provinces to eliminate some of those barriers to provide more opportunities to brewers.
Great, thank you very much. My next couple questions are for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and actually, Ms. Pullum, you had mentioned this in your opening statement about the one-for-one rule that formerly existed, and as well as I note that there was an advisory committee to help identify these barriers, and I know the CFIB was a representative on that committee. Is this committee still in place to advise the government?
The committee that had been in place was dissolved. It's my understanding, though, that they are, I think, looking at reinstating the committee with potentially new members.
Okay. Can I ask when approximately would that have been dissolved?
It was, I think it was about spring or summer of last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've noted is that there used to be a scorecard that was publicized on red tape reduction across the country, and it broke it down between departments, and we haven't seen that online posted for a number of years. Do you know if that's still being done?
So the departments are still supposed to report the number of regulations that each of them have and the number that they've gotten rid of. So if you go by department, you can sometimes see it, but it's certainly not updated for every department every year, as was originally the reason for it to be put into place. So it does continue in some departments, but not others.
Great, thank you very much. And I know that the scorecard had a little bit of different information other than that, so it seems like hopefully they'll bring that back again, because it actually did go into a lot more details and had a different lens. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about was regarding credit card fees. And we know that the government for a couple of years now has been talking about reducing these, and yet we haven't seen anything concrete on this. We know that small businesses, credit card fees really affect them a lot, and especially now during the time where maybe people are ordering online more. So I'm just wondering if you have any input on that, and if it's more important than ever to look at reducing credit card fees.
Yes, so during the pandemic, of course, we saw a huge transition in how people paid. Cash is really non-existent today, and it's really moved to digital payments. And when that happens, of course, from a merchant's perspective, it becomes much more expensive. And when you move online more, those transactions are even more expensive because they're considered to be riskier. So while rates themselves have not gone up, the cost to small businesses have gone up as a result. So we have been sort of pushing the federal government to lower credit card rates, which they have promised to do back in Budget 21, and they did mention again in Budget 22, but we have yet to see any movement on that. There was a reduction, I will say, in 2020 to an average of 1.4, but we believe more needs to be done to really bring more of that savings to small businesses, because a lot of it gets spread out of businesses of all sizes.
Great. Last quick question here is I know that the CFIB itself has reported that the average small business has taken on about $170,000 in new debt during the pandemic, and many have shut or scaled down as a result. So with this new debt, are you concerned with hikes in costs for things like CPP payroll tax increases and carbon tax increases earlier this year will put even more businesses on the edge?
Oh, yes. We're very worried. Now that supports are also going to disappear as of May 7th, there's going to be really nothing to help businesses that are feeling that the load of the debt. And we believe this is the target thing that we have to deal with now, is how do we help those really hard-hit businesses that are dealing with $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 in debt through no fault of their own. We'd love to see, of course, the CEBA loan, a forgivable portion increased, or even other measures that we can think about to help those businesses get out of that debt. I think the next 3 to 6 months, we may very well see more bankruptcies, as I know other countries who've, once they've got rid of their supports, started to see a bit of an increase in those bankruptcy and closures. So I wouldn't be surprised if we started seeing that here more, unless we can do more to help with that debt.
Merci. Thank you, Madam Gray, Madam Pullman. We'll move to Mr. Erskine-Smith for 6 minutes.
Thanks very much. I want to stick with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business and start with the red tape recommendation that you made. And maybe not in your answer, but could you commit to providing a list of examples of red tape at the federal level? It would be helpful to have more concrete examples, I think, for the committee. Could you come, I know I appreciate the slide deck, but could you come back to us with some more concrete examples of red tape at the federal level?
We can certainly do that, but I will say that it isn't just about fixing individual pieces, it's also about fixing the whole system. So that's why things like the Red Tape Reduction Act have been very effective at helping to fix the entire system by putting some constraints on regulators. So we need to continue to reinforce
pause there, actually, because that's really helpful. So, because I did have a question about the one-for-one rule. We had Treasury Board in the last Parliament testify in front of us on similar issues around competitiveness. And I appreciate the need to address red tape in the sense that if there's something duplicative or unnecessary, addressing that and reducing costs makes a lot of sense. But in other cases, there are important rules that are in place for the interests of public safety or environmental protections, and casting those measures as red tape is sometimes unhelpful. And I've never really understood the rationale, the philosophical rationale behind the one-for-one rule. It's this idea that we've just managed at some point in time to have the perfect number of rules, and if we impose a new rule, there should be one fewer rule in some other place. So shouldn't we be more focused on this conversation around what is unnecessary or duplicative and really gets in the way without a public interest rationale behind it?
I think both is necessary, to be honest. I think that when it comes to understanding which rules, I agree, we need the rules, we need to protect environment, we need to protect health, we need to protect safety, and there's no doubt about that. But there also needs to be a bit more of a clarity around the people that create the rules to understand that you can't just keep creating. You also have to think about managing what's already in place. And by having some sort of parameters around how to manage those rules that are already in place, I think would help. And right now, there's a bit of that, but not enough, I think, to really manage the volumes, because it just keeps growing, the volumes.
Well, and that takes me, I guess, to my first question again. So in the interest of managing existing rules, if you can give us sort of a concrete list of existing rules that you think ought to be managed a bit better, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
And similarly, I would find it helpful. Look, we're not going to freeze the carbon tax and the price on pollution. Like it doesn't make any sense in the interest of tackling carbon emissions as we need to, as a matter of our obligation to the world and future generations. And it makes no sense for us to do that. It's the most economically efficient way of tackling climate change. So if you could instead come back to us, and I did note in your slide deck, there was a piece to say, and small businesses pay a disproportionate sum, but they don't benefit from the rebate proportionately. And if you could, again, come back to us, I think, with a more, freezing is not of interest to me, but if there's a more elegant solution in relation to maybe taking a share of the revenue and distributing it fairly from small businesses, I would be interested in that if you can come back to us in writing. And then for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, I have the piece on Competition Act reform. I take the concern to be we're in a difficult inflationary environment, and additional reforms right now may not be welcome if they upset if they create greater burdens and regulatory compliance. How do we square that, though, with we are a country of oligopolies, and oligopolies increase prices for consumers. And we've seen that in telecommunications, we see that in grocery stores. And we've even seen it in this inflation environment where the companies that exist within these oligopolies are profiting despite the inflation. It's not just that prices are increasing, their profits are also increasing at the same time. So how do we square those concerns with, on the one hand, I take the concern you've laid out, but I would put the concern back to say, don't we want greater competition to drive prices down?
Well, I mean, at the risk of having a caricature of what the business community is like, I mean, profit is not a bad problem unto itself. So I think that's worth, sort of stating the obvious in that regard. The point about inflation, particularly, is if you look at what is driving the inflationary pressures right now, supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, and I think there's a risk that we say competition is the panacea that's going to deal with inflation, and that we make a knee-jerk reaction to this. This is a very, very complex area of law. It's not just about competition policy. It's how does it also interact with other regulated sectors and sector-specific measures and other horizontal measures such as privacy. And I think doing this on the fly is not something that we want to do. I mean, I think Robin and I may disagree perhaps on some of the outcomes, but I think we both agree that, whatever it is, we need to make sure it's done in a deliberative way and it's done right.
Well, that's fair. And just my only comment back would be to see, when I see grocery stores as an example, having, $4 billion more in profit post-pandemic in an inflation environment than pre-pandemic, I'm a little bit concerned when I think of the cost to consumers. But I take your point that profit shouldn't be sort of a problem in and of itself, certainly for business. But to put the same question to Ms. Shaban, I mean, don't we want greater competition, and shouldn't we be using the Act to increase competition if we're concerned about prices for consumers in the end, especially in the environment in which we live?
Yes. Yeah, I think simply put, and I think that in light of the review, there's some opportunities for us to rethink specifically how we plan to use the Act to accomplish that. I think that coming back to the study that I spoke about that I and some colleagues did for ISED, one of the themes that came up again and again was how specifically the Act evaluates anti-competitive conduct, and whether this method for determining whether conduct is anti-competitive or not is actually tractable in our modern economy, where a lot of the anti-competitive effects of behavior that's happening today actually manifest many years from now. And it's not realistic for regulators to be able to summon the future in a crystal ball. And so because of that, I think we need to be rethinking really the core fundamentals of how the law works and how it's applied today. And that ties specifically to substantive tests. Again, these methods by which officers at the Competition Bureau actually identify and determine whether certain behavior is anti-competitive under the law.
Thanks very much.
Merci beaucoup. Je passe.
Thank you. Mr. Lemire, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank all of the witnesses. You've really set the table very well this afternoon, and I can see how urgent it is to take action with respect to the labor shortage. You've talked about the number of vacancies in Quebec that you talked about. There are about 1 million vacant positions, and that you've had to turn down contracts. But at the same time, if we want to make sure that we take a logical approach, one of the issues we have to deal with is the change in demographics. We have to make more room for women, for families, and help them. The combination of various methods may be the solution. With 76,000 additional employees that could help deal with this shortage, how do you think that we're going to make this more attractive? That's an excellent question. Unfortunately, the labor shortage is not a new problem. There is consequences to this problem, and you have listed a few examples. But before turning the floor over to my colleague Denis, who can give you more clarity on the issue of experienced workers, if we had the same concern as Ontario did, Quebec likes to compare itself to Ontario. So if we did enough to attract experienced workers, it's true. You talked about 76 additional workers who today would be in the labor market and able to contribute. How can we get there? With incentives. We have to raise the minimum salary rate without penalties for the pension plan. That's ensure that companies that participate and that have experienced workers don't have to pay to the war effort, if you like. But this is just one solution, and I could now ask Denis to give you more examples, because there's not just one solution. There are several that have to be taken into account in the short, medium, and long term. And I would like Mr. Hamel to complete my answer. Yes, thank you. The whole issue of experienced workers is important. It's a group that we can approach very quickly and get rid of this perception that they are working for nothing, that they're going to lose their GIS or whatever. We have to help employers use various mechanisms to retain and recruit experienced workers. Let's say EI payments could be forgiven for experienced workers, or think about people who don't want to work every day, every week of the year. So we could make the work more flexible, adapt the work, because since the pandemic, we have lost a lot of workers who are age 55 and over. Thank you very much. With respect to broadening the labor pool, Mr. Blackburn, you said that recently that without broadening this pool of workers, we have to rely on immigration. If you talked about various figures when we talk about immigration files, the fact that they are processed so slowly, is that cause a problem? Yes, definitely. This is a very important issue. The processing of files with respect to immigration, unfortunately, can take just up to 24 months, whereas in the rest of Canada, it takes only 6 months. So this is a real problem. But for the benefits of those here at the table, we did a workforce survey. 1.4 million workers in Quebec were about to leave. The first pool of workers, students, those who are being trained, they could fulfill 50% of the work that's done by those who are going to go on retirement. And then what about the groups that are living far away from the workplace? Let's say disabled people, women, First Nations, older workers. So this group could represent 25% of our needs, and another 23% could come from immigration. And the figure used that is estimated to be 74,000 immigrants. In Quebec, the immigrants arrive in Quebec, but with this 64,000 people, we'll be able to do something. We're hoping that we're going to be able to make up for the shortfall with all these people leaving to retire. So the figures have never been over 50,000 per year, but now we can see that this gap is growing even wider. In February 2022, about 250,000 people, 250,000 job vacancies in Quebec. In order to deal with this situation, we have to avoid jurisdictional conflicts and ensure that the federal government, with the adjustments it's made, to the TFW program, well, the measures that were brought to bear need to help us. How can we have access to a bigger pool of workers for our businesses and ensure that that the length of time that's needed to get a TFW is reduced? The economy in itself is very volatile right now. That worries me. And so we need three conditions to have better prosperity: predictability, certainty, and longevity. So we have to be able, with the decisions made with immigrations, to deal with these three ingredients that will ensure that we will have a good recipe for prosperity. Thank you very much, Mr. Blackburn and Mr. Amel. I will turn the floor over to Mr. Massey for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses. Maybe start with Ms. Shaban. With regards to anti-competitive behavior, how do we kind of fit with our American cousins in terms of, and also to Europe, kind of what are the trends that are happening in those countries to deal with anti-competitive behavior? I'd be interested to hear where we're fitting in those jurisdictions that we, often do a lot of trade and connect with.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, that's a big question to unpack, but I will say, again, back to the report that I and Vas Bednar and Anna Corey did for ISED, one of the bits of analysis we did is we compared cases that were taken in the European Union by the European Commission to cases that were also taken by the Competition Bureau in Canada on relatively similar conduct. So this included, for example, Google and its self-preferencing of its own shopping service on its website. Both the Competition Bureau and the European Commission both took cases on or undertook investigations on this conduct. And the European Commission found that behavior to be anti-competitive and fined Google, I can't remember how many billions of euros, but, a lot. In the Canadian investigation, the Bureau found that there was no evidence of anti-competitive behavior. And so it raises this question of, all right, how did the European Commission manage to fine Google billions of dollars or euros, yet in Canada, somehow this isn't anti-competitive? And so I think a lot of these same trends are occurring across jurisdictions, and it's just given the global nature of digital commerce, right? I think the difference that we're seeing in Canada versus other major jurisdictions is that our competition law is not keeping pace with what competition laws elsewhere are able to do. And again, I know it's kind of boring, but this really comes down to specifically how the Act understands and evaluates anti-competitive conduct and moving towards a more rules-based system where anti-competitive conduct is, if you do a certain thing, it's illegal. This is closer to the more European model, whereas in Canada, we have this very effects-based approach where you need to show heaps of evidence that this particular behavior actually is detrimental. I'll pause there because I know you only got 6 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. And if you hear a cat in the background, that's my Siamese cat. That's so. At any rate, it's not even my cat; it's my daughter's cat. But anyway, just with that though, and is it we finally actually saw some increases supports for the Competition Bureau. So you're saying that even with those supports, we're still offside on those things. So it really is about remaking our entire model. Like we can pour more money into it, and we still might not get the proper outcomes. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and you hear that a lot, I think, from a lot of folks in the competition policy space. The solution is just more enforcement. We need more money in the Bureau. The Bureau needs to go out and take more cases. And that's part of the solution. But again, if you don't have the right tools for actually addressing this anti-competitive conduct, then you're kind of throwing money away, right? You're taking these investigations that don't actually lead to firms changing their behaviors because the law just isn't there as an effective tool, especially in our more modern digital economy.
Okay, excellent. And I'm going to move to the CFIB. One of the things that asked the Business Development Bank of Canada about was the lack of or whether they had any interest in having a credit card for small businesses. I thought it was, pretty interesting that they did do a study. They didn't know when it was. They're supposed to get back to us, but it was a long period of time ago, because the Business Development Bank of Canada is supposed to be the lender of last resort when the private sector does not come to the table in an appropriate fashion. And I thought for sure there would be interest in at least a credit card that had proper fees. I mean, if the government's not willing to regulate this and bring it under control, I'm just a little bit surprised why they wouldn't even take advantage of that opportunity as a lender of last resort, so to speak. And so, wondering what the CFIB thinks about that. I'll be interested to see whether or not there's even support out there to ask them to contact their members and do a poll like they did before to find out if that product is of interest, because that actually might generate some competition in the sector that's just poorly needed.
Right.
Or sorely needed. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. My answer is I don't know what our members would think of that. It would be something we would have to ask them. Their issue is, of course, more on accepting payments than it is on the credit card itself. I mean, BDC, of course, I agree with you, as a lender of last resort, they do a good job as sort of trying to help businesses that can't find any financing anywhere, and a credit card could be another option for them to offer that kind of financing for small businesses. But I don't know what they can really do on the accepting payment side of the equation. So I think that's where it becomes a bit more tricky.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things, though. I think that I'm hoping they're actually going to take seriously, because even if the transition fees and transaction fees, I mean, I know a lot of small businesses that keep hopping amongst operators just because of even the games they have to play and having to change machinery and equipment and training. And this is it's all a net negative, because it really isn't about creating opportunity for them to be effective in business. It's about managing financial transactions that are quite frankly abusive. With regards to
Monsieur Mas, I'll have to stop you here because we're
thank
out
you,
of
Mr.
time.
Chair. Sorry.
But
Thank you.
we'll get back to you. And so, Monsieur Généreux pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Généreux, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses. Mrs. Chabin, you've referred to a report. Could you share this report with us, because we don't know exactly what you're referring to? I think you have already been here before the committee. Is it a report that we did here in the committee? Which report are you talking about?
Yeah, so the report I keep referring to is a report that I, as well as two other colleagues, Vas Bednar and Anna Corey, we were commissioned to do a report by ISED.
Okay, c'est bon.
Yeah, and the nature of the report was an exploration of competition policy in data-driven markets. So looking at the impact of big data in competition policy and how testing whether our Competition Act is fit to address these issues. So this report is available online on the Vivek Research website. And so when I get back at my desk, I'll tweet it.
Yeah, le faire suivre. Madame Pullman.
Ms. Pullman, do you speak French? A little bit. Earlier, you talked about the carbon tax, and the figures really surprised me. You talked about 45% and 8%. This is a difference between what the SMEs are paying and the bigger companies. And the government is telling us ad nauseum that this program is neutral, that there's no cost for the businesses. And what you're saying is that this is false.
So what I'm saying is, of the carbon backstop that applies in Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, the carbon tax in those provinces, about 45 to 50% is actually of that revenue comes from small and medium-sized businesses, as well as the municipalities, hospitals, and schools, but they're only like 5% of that amount. Okay. The rest is all small and medium-sized companies.
Et il leur revient seulement 8%.
And they only get back, well, they set aside 8 to 10% for that group, which was supposed to go into programs, but those programs, only one was ever created prior to the pandemic. And in order to access the program, you had to invest $80,000 in your business to get any money back in a subsidy. So it wasn't accessible to small companies. And since then, nothing. The money has just been sitting in government revenues, so nothing has come back to small businesses.
Intéressant.
That's interesting. Mr. Blackburn, Carl, I don't know where you are, but I was happy to see you today. The labor shortage. You answered my colleague's question that Ontario was better positioned than Quebec. What is this distinction? Is this a tax difference between Quebec and Ontario that enables Ontarians to remain working longer? Or what the activity rate of this category of worker is higher in Ontario than it is in Quebec. When we try to get the same level with tax measures, because both the provincial and federal government would be able to take action, but they didn't do it at the provincial or federal level. We try to allow these people to remain at work, but what you're saying that even in the 2021 budget, nothing was done? The specific measures to encourage experienced workers to remain in the labor market. But if I'm not mistaken, steps were taken. But what you're saying is that we should increase this even more. And your colleague talked about maybe not paying the EI premiums or whatever. What does that cost? 15% more, and then there's the payroll charges. So there could be some costs that could be suspended to enable this rate to go up higher. Yes, the federal government that was just launched on last April 4th, I believe it was the increase as being an important aspect. Are you aware of this program? I don't have all the details of that, but it's clear that this program with specific measures could be attractive. And I would ask Denny to give you a more concrete example, because in the solutions that we suggested, training, literacy, and an increase in technology, as an example, unfortunately in Quebec, we have a literacy problem, and this is hampering us. So with specific measures to deal with that situation, we could really achieve our objectives. And I go back to the EI program. You're reviewing the EI program offered by the Government of Canada. Given that we have training issues, that we have skills issues, why not provide an ongoing training program through EI that could help us with EI? And they would have to take training, and that's an excellent idea. And the EI program, well, the government, conservative government, suggested a review of the whole program a number of years ago. I forget when, but we were bombarded with all kinds of negative feedback. But the very principle of this reform was to take available jobs. You said that there are more vacant positions than there are EI recipients. So we have to try and connect the two of them together. And I remember we talked about living within 71 kilometers from a job. Today, in La Pocatière, I can tell you the CEGEP professors and travel 100 kilometers on a daily basis. And Mr. General, I apologize. I know that you are launched. I don't want to interrupt you, but all good things come to an end. I imagine that you'll be able to raise this issue again in other questions.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for making time for the committee. My first question is for Vivek Research, and I just wanted to give you a chance to expand on the comments that you were making in response to Mr. Erskine-Smith's questions. Now, you mentioned that the way the Competition Act is sort of set up right now, it's like looking at a crystal ball. and predicting whether there will be an anti-competitive effect. Is there a replacement system that you sort of have recommended, or that there's a problem with that system? What's better than?
Yeah, thank you. I think that there's a spectrum of solutions, and what I'd like to see from the review of the Competition Act is some deeper thinking on what some of these alternatives could be. And this is where my point about stakeholders coming together and finding compromise, I think, is really important. We need everyone at the table to really sit down and think about how exactly we want to be evaluating anti-competitive conduct. So that's a long way of saying there's a lot of potential solutions to this, but what I'd like to see is us moving more towards a rules-based approach for evaluating anti-competitive conduct. So I don't want to be long-winded, but I will give a quick example. So when it comes to evaluating mergers, in Canada, you can't say to the Competition Tribunal, please block this merger because it literally creates a monopoly. You need to show that because this merger creates a monopoly, it's going to increase prices. And that's just textbook economics 101. We know that. So why do we need the Commissioner of the Competition Bureau to reinvent Econ 101 in front of the Competition Tribunal? So I think integrating things like if you have a merger to monopoly, it's just blocked outright, I think is pretty reasonable. And that, again, is more of this rules-based approach to evaluating anti-competitive conduct and its harm. And I can see other places where it could also fit in, but I think I don't have a definitive answer on what I think that would look like today. I think that's for more open discussion.
Yep. Great, thank you. Just to follow up, I'm thinking back to law school. There's sort of two ways to do things. One side is more of a subjective approach. That takes into consideration more characteristics, but it becomes subjective. And the other side is a rules-based order, but with that, it can become rigid at times, and certain things will fall through the cracks. So is it sort of a balance that you have to find? Or?
Yeah, I think that we need to restrike the balance. And it may have been that in the past, the balance that we had before was working. But I think that this balance is becoming more challenging, especially in the advent of digital economy, and in particular, the impact of big data on companies. The reason why big data is so important is because it can create these competitive advantages that firms, in many cases, just realistically can't challenge. So as a small or medium-sized enterprise, if you're going against a behemoth that has data and can have a bird's eye view of the entire market and essentially swipe you and your customers at any moment because of this data and this insight, how do you navigate that? And so a more rules-based approach may enable the Bureau to preemptively prevent those sorts of situations from arising, or preventing those situations from arising in an anti-competitive way, right? And so I think, again, this balance needs to be restruck given just the nature of commerce and the evolution of it, particularly over the last few years with digitization.
Great. Thank you. I look forward to reading your report.
Thanks.
I wanted to shift gears a little bit, and my next question is for CFIB, Ms. Pullman. We talk about rising commodity prices worldwide. Isn't there a way in which that can benefit Canadian producers to take advantage of that? Supply chains have been disrupted worldwide, and if we can produce some of that stuff here and supply the rest of the world, couldn't that benefit us?
Certainly, but rising costs impact you either way. So it's a matter of being able to actually get out from underneath your debt load, be able to invest in your business and move forward. I think the nice thing about entrepreneurs and about small businesses is that they are innovative, and they do try to do what they can to build the business in any way that they can. So, I definitely can see whether there can be that advantage, but at the same time, of course, you're also facing all these other barriers in order for you to get there, which includes rising prices, inflation, shortage of labor, all these other things that are affecting them right now, plus the fact that the pandemic has hit so many of them so hard. But there's no doubt that there's still opportunities out there, and there are going to be many that are going to try and take advantage of those for sure.
Great, thank you. Chair,
You're out of time.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Gahir. Monsieur Le Maire for 2.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will go back to Mr. Blackwood. That Quebec is the only province that's responsible for its labor policy, and it's created an ecosystem with the government of Quebec, the Conseil du Patronat, and the Association of Exporters of Quebec, and the Quebec Chambers of Commerce. Have they produced all the studies necessary to deal with their labor shortages? In my sense, that in my opinion, that we have all of these impact studies, but it seems to me that our businesses are being hurt. I'm going to turn the floor over to Denny. I speak too much, but the model that we have is a model that could inspire the rest of Canada. But I'd like to ask Denny to provide an explanation with respect to your question, Mr. Lemire. Thank you. You're quite right, Mr. Lemire. There's a lot of impact studies done, and the fact that the groups that you mentioned publishes every year a report that shows that we don't have enough skilled labor. This is very important. Once there's a deficit in a trade, we don't need to justify the fact that we're looking for people and that we have to wait weeks and weeks and weeks. There's already a measure that exists, at least in Quebec. It's called an accelerated treatment. So I think that we should extend this accelerator mechanism to other trades as well. There are 237 professions that are in a deficit position, and I think we need to do something. In addition, so before the pandemic, the situation was different. Do you think that Quebec is much further ahead with the repatriation of TWFs rather than come up with an immigration policy? Would that help our Quebec businesses? Denny, I'll let you answer that. When you talked about double jurisdiction, it's that the two governments have to work in better cooperation with each other, because with the current program, I agree with you, it's outdated. We need to modernize the TFW program. It was designed when we had 12% or 15% unemployment. We need to have better cooperation to avoid duplication. Neither the federal or provincial government will do better on its own. They have to work together, and these delays, these wait times don't make any sense. And Mr. Lemire, the modernization of this program is one that will be good. We received our Prime Minister of Canada last week, and we asked him that we really, truly modernize this program because it no longer reflects our reality. Thank you very much. Mr. Moss, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the Brewers Canada, my colleague Richard Cannings has introduced a private members bill that would eliminate the excise tax on non-alcoholic or low-alcoholic beer. It's treated special by having it tax fully. So can you confirm support of that, and perhaps a little bit about why this would be an important step to assist not only just the larger brewers, but also the microbrewers that want to get into lower alcohol beverages?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Beer Canada did have the opportunity to meet with Mr. Cannings to talk about the excise treatment of non-alcoholic beer in Canada. It's a obscure situation that kind of caught us by surprise. Beer, compared to wine and spirits, does pay excise, while those other categories are exempted from any excise at all. I will say over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, while it was a challenging time for beer sales, there was some promise in non-alcoholic beer sales. We did see some substantial growth in that segment of the category over the last 2 years. So there are brewers that are making substantial investments in that space of the market, and we were pleased to see Mr. Cannings and I believe yourself raise the profile of that issue, and for the government to take a look at that and include it in this year's budget. So that's a good news story for the beer industry, and I think it will send a positive signal to brewers across Canada to look to invest in that space of the market moving forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and it's one of those things. I think when we this also a specific. I think I always get a little flustered when we just use red tape as a without putting the specifics, because we've had recommendations before, and then you don't really cut the specifics to go at. So I think this is one of those ones that could be used as an example. And can you confirm? And I have a local brewery here. Of course, most people do. But do you think that more microbrews would get involved in this with eliminating this? I know it's not the one thing. It's not a huge thing, but it's part of the kind of like hits that they don't need to have. That's what I'm sensing and what I'm hearing. And I'm just wondering if that's across the country. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big reason why we did see growth in non-alcoholic beer sales over the last 2 years, because small brewers are becoming more interested in that space, and I think it's being driven by consumers looking to lead healthier lifestyles and to look at experimenting with more non-alcoholic products. So, I like to say that the types of non-alcoholic beer products that we're seeing on the market today are much more unique and distinct than what we saw 10 or 20 years ago. We're seeing styles like West Coast IPAs, stouts, and other types of beers that are produced non-alcohol with no alcohol in them, and they still have the the characteristics and tastes that consumers would naturally associate with beer. And I don't want to. I hope members of this committee don't. It's a very complicated process to produce a non-alcoholic beer product and be able to preserve those tastes and characteristics. So there's a lot of investment required to make high-quality non-alcoholic beer products. And again, Mr. Canning's private members bill was helpful in raising the profile of this segment of the category. And I do think we'll continue to see both large and small brewers invest in this space of the market moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Maas. Mr. Chapman, we'll move to Mr. Cram for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for joining us today. Ms. Pullman, in your opening statement, you talked about the carbon tax, and if I quoted you correctly, you said that the federal carbon tax backstop has a disproportionate effect on small businesses. Could you elaborate on why that is the case?
Sure, and I'll point out that just last week, I believe the Environment Commissioner also mentioned that in their reports as well. Essentially, as I mentioned earlier to Mr. Généreux, that the fact is in the province where it applies, about 50% of the revenues that are taken are from small and medium-sized companies. And only about 8 to 10% is set aside to give back to small and medium-sized companies. And even that 8 to 10% has never been given back, other than in a program in about 2019, where you had to invest $80,000 into your company in order to get a little bit of money back from the government. So it wasn't very accessible. And so there's been no programs made available to small businesses to help them with their environmental footprints. And so we're still hoping to see something, either a rebate provided or new programs that can be accessible and easy for them to access to invest in more energy efficiency. So those are the things we'd like to see that money being used for, ideally something that allows it to be a bit fairer to them.
And if I also understood you correctly, you're recommending a freeze in CPP, EI, and carbon tax. Was that correct?
It was a moratorium during the years where they're struggling. We're not necessarily suggesting these are permanent, but just, again, it's about the costs that are being layered on top of small businesses, and these are the costs governments control. And is there a way during this sort of difficult period that we can just put a moratorium on them until maybe another year or two once they can get back on their feet again?
Okay. And Mr. Chapman from Beer Canada, you spoke about the automatic increase to federal excise duties for beer. Could you explain and elaborate on why that is a challenge for the competitiveness of your sector?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I alluded to earlier in this session, brewers are already dealing with historically high input costs. The amount of dollars that it costs to produce beer in Canada has risen quite substantially over the last 2 years. And our message to the government is, we're not opposed, brewers are not opposed to paying their fair share of taxes in Canada. Right now, nearly 50% of the retail price of beer is one form of tax or another. What we are opposed to is automatic annual increases that are void of any debate or vote by members of parliament, especially considering the high inflation environment that we're in right now. These annual increases are indexed to inflation, and when we're dealing with monthly inflation that is at 6 or 7%, we're looking at an increase in April of 2023 that could be as high as 7 to 8% on beer at a very challenging time for the industry, and also a very challenging time for our big customers in the restaurant and bar business. So our message to the government is to look at the environment that we're operating in. Brewers are also making multi-million-dollar investments to transition away from plastic ring carriers, which we support, and we're doing our part to make sure that the government objective to eliminate plastic waste is reached. We're just asking for this government to revisit this approach to taxation at this point in time.
So if I understand you correctly, if politicians want to raise taxes on your sector, it should not be automatic. Politicians should have to table that bill and debate it on its own merits like any other tax. Is that correct?
That is exactly it.
Okay, very good. And well, then maybe I will circle back to Ms. Pullman. Could the same argument be made about the carbon tax? If politicians want to raise the carbon tax, they should debate that in any budget like they would any other tax increase like GST or income tax or anything else. Would that be a reasonable position for CFIB?
Certainly. I mean, anytime any kind of tax is brought forward, it should be something that's debated and discussed, and I think thought through in terms of what is its policy outcome and what are the impacts it's going to have on the people that it affects.
Okay, understood. And I believe Ms. Pullman also spoke about the need to decrease credit card fees for small businesses. What would you recommend the federal government do to stimulate competition when it comes to credit cards for small businesses?
Well, that's a tough one. So the one thing that we were able to introduce in Canada about 10 years ago was a credit and debit card industry code of conduct, because from a merchant's perspective, they've always felt like they were price takers when it comes to having to take whatever it is that the credit card companies wanted to impose on the merchants in terms of costs. And so when the code of conduct was created, that certainly helped to level the playing field. It put in sort of a set of rules that all the credit card companies had to follow, and it allowed the businesses or merchants to understand what those rules were in a better way and what to expect. It's not perfect. There's still a lot more that can be done. In fact, the government is currently going through a review of that code of conduct to update it and make it, modernize it, because certainly the digital payments industry is going through lots of changes and lots of, so we need to make sure that the code of conduct is up to date with those changes, and that it incorporates a lot of these companies, which are mostly not Canadian. They're often international companies, so we want to make sure that they're brought into the mix so that Canadian merchants understand what it is that they're paying, how it's being paid, and that they can actually read the statements that they have given to them so that they can go around and shop around. Right now, it can be very difficult to do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Madame Lapointe pour 5 minutes.
5 minutes, Mrs. Lapointe.
Merci, Monsieur
5 minutes, and Mrs. Blunt. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Shaban. In your opening remarks, you stated competition policy is inherently political. Can you expand on that point?
Yeah. I think the fact of the matter is that with the various stakeholders that are impacted by competition policy, there's going to be varying needs. And a lot of times, I think these needs and interests are going to conflict. And I think that this is it is just the reality of the situation that we are bringing ourselves in with the review of the Act. And the reason why I bring that up is because in competition policy circles, amongst experts, there's this desire and belief that we can sanitize competition policy and remove it from this political context. But like I explained in my remarks, that's not actually the case. Because if we ignore the reality that there are conflicting interests at play in light of the review, we're actually just kicking the can down the road, right? We're passing this problem on to other policy areas. And I think that this passing the buck actually can be more expensive to government and ultimately taxpayers. How much more expensive, like the example I gave, how much more expensive would it be for Industry Canada, for ISED, to deliver more grants, more supporting programs to small and medium-sized businesses? Could some of that actually be offset with better competition law and better enforcement of that law? The great thing about competition law is that in a lot of ways it's pretty inexpensive. All you really need to do, I mean, it's not this simple, but you create legislation, you develop an enforcement agency, and a lot of the mechanism of that is just simply the threat of enforcement, right? There's a deterrence effect. And deterrence is actually pretty inexpensive as far as policy interventions go. A lot more inexpensive than actually writing checks to small businesses or consumers in the form of tax and transfer. And so this is the point I'm making, that there's intersections in the interests of the stakeholders that are going to be at the table, and we need to reckon with that and acknowledge it, because this has implications for how competition law intersects with other policy interventions at the federal and I'd say also provincial levels too.
If you had to advise the government on how to modernize and reform the Competition Act, what would you say are the top two things the government should do?
Yeah, well, the reason why I spoke about the purpose statement of the Competition Act is because I think that this is actually one of the most critical aspects. And I think it's less critical from that legal perspective. That legal importance of the purpose statement it's not that critical. What's most important is setting a purpose statement that orients the conversation in a way that is productive and that brings in all stakeholders. And that includes big business, small business, and all these other stakeholders that I mentioned. And I think the second most important thing is something I've already talked about here too. It's rethinking how we actually evaluate and identify anti-competitive conduct, because again, our economy is changing, and unlike in the past, I think we're faced with more problems of having to predict what behaviors today are going to do, the implications of that in the future, and there's limits to that. And so perhaps taking a more rules-based approach, while it may be a more blunt instrument, can actually help us prevent some of these anti-competitive problems before they get a bit out of control.
So if the goal is fair commerce, what does that look like for SMEs?
Yeah, good question. I think ultimately, like, SMEs have to answer that, but I mean, my take on it is I think it is dynamic marketplaces where SMEs can realistically enter the market and achieve some sort of scale in order to be an effective competitor. And something that's really unique about markets today, in particular markets where there's lots of data, where there are network effects, is that it's very difficult for businesses to enter those spaces and scale. And part of that is the business model. Part of that might be legitimate business advantages that incumbents have. But I think a lot of this, too, has to do with the nature of data and the role that data can play as a competitive advantage. And I think we need to ask ourselves whether we're okay with large firms having large amounts of data that they can then use to essentially hive themselves off from competition or protect themselves from new entrants that might come in and challenge their dominant position. And I think that there can be policy interventions both through competition law, but perhaps other policy tools like data trusts that enable small and medium-sized enterprises to get access to this data and be effective competitors in the space. So that was again, it kind of ties into some of the themes that we talk about, my colleagues and I, with that report for ISED that I've been referencing.
Thank you very much. On passe maintenant à Monsieur Deltel pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Deltel, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's very nice to see all the witnesses. I'm always impressed by the quality of the witnesses that we have and the reports that are tabled with us.
This committee and especially for this country. Monsieur le Président, je vais aller interroger.
I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Blackburn. I'm going to do exactly the opposite as to what my colleague did. Thank you. Mr. Blackburn was an MP at the Quebec provincial legislation, so he is very close to the issue that we are dealing with today. Thank you very much, Mr. Blackburn, for your contribution. I'd also like to say hello to Mr. Amel as well. You said something that surprised me, and I didn't know about this. You said that there are more vacant positions than there are people are receiving EI. How do you explain that? Unfortunately, with a very low unemployment level, it's under 4%. I would also like to use vous when I talk to you, and I shouldn't have tutoied Mr. You're entitled to say tu and not vous, but he isn't. So we have an unemployment rate of under 4.5%, and unfortunately, with such a low rate, and when we have high activity, historically high, we're witnessing, as someone said earlier, it's a perfect storm. It's the explanation that is very important. It's a perfect storm because right now we need all these employees, and if we aren't able to broaden our base of workers, we won't be able to deal with this current situation with the people who are on an EI or young people who are unemployed, they're not studying. So we have to be able to broaden this pool and bring in the experienced people, other individuals as well, but we can't get everybody in employment. We can't put them all to work, but we could certainly get a lot of them on track, and this will be the society will be much better for it collectively. And this proposal that you made to have in training through the EI program, you would think that these people who are on unemployment could get a job, yes, but unfortunately, how explain that with the current situation, there are still 4.5 people who are unemployed, when in fact we're witnessing the largest labor shortage in our collective history. The pandemic is not the cause of the labor shortage. I think it's important to remember this. The pandemic accelerated the labor shortage, particularly in the tourist sector or in the retail sector, accommodation, etc. But in other sectors, there's been growth that's been exponential. There's a transition. Of employees, and we need to ensure that these employees are given the training they need and get us through this current situation. The CFI said that one element that it did not mention, but something that needs to be done by year end, is we need to be able to put specific programs in place to help certain workers in specific sectors, such as the aerospace sector. This program needs to be extended to the end of the year. Why? They need to be able to strengthen their operations despite the circumstances, given the current situation. If this program is not maintained for these key sectors that are fragile, it will be catastrophic for many sectors. France has a bit of a special operation, as you know. Inflation is very high here in Canada, almost 7%, but in France, it's 4.1%. And one measure that the French government implemented was to manage fees for a certain period of time. We know that inflation has a direct impact on business people. Do you think that the government could base itself on what is done in France and to freeze these prices to give a little bit of a break to workers and businesses. That is not going to hurt. That's clear. It will enable us to minimize all of the pressure that engenders further inflation. But we have to remember that there's a big pressure being put on the markets that don't manage to meet the needs due to the supply chain, which has been hard hit during the pandemic. And unfortunately, with markets opening up again, there's a lot of pressure, and the labor shortage contributes as well to lead to further inflation because there'll be increases in salaries. Just as an example, last fall we had a forum on salary forecasts for the coming year. For 2022, it was estimated by all of the experts, for 2022, they projected an increase of 2.9% and 3.1%. So we've gone way beyond that. In some cases, there has been an increase of 25 to 30% in certain sectors that were hard hit by the pandemic. So you can see that there's a series of events that have been increasing the pressure. We're in an inflationary spiral right now, and the government can get the central bank to play a role because we know that the interest rates are going to go up, everyone's going to pay. And then there's a risk of a recession, so we have to strike a balance. It's not an easy task. It's not just one measure. It's a whole suite of measures that are required to really deal with this inflationary spiral. But we can base ourselves on what's done elsewhere. Mr. Dong for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I also want to thank all the witnesses for coming today. As I was listening to your testimony, I was thinking, competition. I went back to the motion. We really should separate competition between, domestic market competition and international market competition, because the role of the government will be very different. International competition would be looking at branding. We'd be looking at, value of dollar, our labor cost advantage, and so on and so forth, and trade agreements. I think today, judging from the conversation here, I think we're mainly focusing on domestic market competition, where I think when it comes to domestic market, we will have to look at the government's role. We talked about the cost of labor. We talked about the administration cost, logistic cost for businesses, consumer behavior change during the pandemic and whatnot. I think more importantly, we have to look at domestic economy. I think overall, I'll let you answer this. Would you agree that in the last 2-3 years that Canada, compared to the rest of the world, in terms of economic recovery and its health of its economy, has been enabling small, medium-sized economy or business to grow and to sustain with all the support from the government and preparation of the playing field? So start with Ms.
Pullman. Canada's been blessed with the fact that over the years we have had good growth in small businesses. We've been very fortunate that we've always had more small business created every year than lost. So it's always been net growing. What's been happening, though, is that just before the pandemic and during the pandemic, that hasn't been happening as much. That we've sort of evened out and even have seen more closures than growth. And I think that should worry us. Is that a pandemic response, or is there something deeper? I think is what we're going to have to wait and see, because.
Sorry, I just got a little bit of time here. Understandable. So, but would you say that compared to the rest of the world and the rest of the governments around the world, that Canadian government has been there for small businesses to minimize the loss of our small businesses in Canada?
Certainly during the pandemic, there has been, I think, a good supports. That was very helpful, and I think will continue to hopefully bear fruit as we continue to recover. But we're going to have to wait and see because we're at that pivot point, right?
So you also mentioned that you observed some change of behavior from consumers during the pandemic, and now there's a trend of shopping online and whatnot. Are you aware of I think it's called a digital adoption program, $4 billion? And tell me about how your members finding this program. Is it widely used? Is it helpful? Yeah.
So the digital adoption program, I'm not sure is my answer right now. We're certainly trying to promote it and let our members know about it. I think it came a little late in the game because many of them adopted digital systems earlier on in the pandemic, and that's maybe where it would have been needed more. I know it was based on a program called Digital Main Street out of Ontario, which was really well liked and well used. So I think the idea behind it is good. My worry is that it's a bit complex in terms of how to access, because there's multiple stakeholders involved, and depending on where you are, you have to apply through a different group. So that's my worry, is that it might be a little too complex for many small businesses to actually take advantage of, and maybe a little late. We're going to certainly do what we can to encourage businesses interested in that type of growth.
Was there a role of Digital Main Street program by the federal government?
The Digital Main Street program was sort of a private sector thing that was supported initially, I believe, by the provincial government of Ontario and has since expanded.
And the municipal government as well?
And the municipal government, it's Toronto.
That's good. I would be very interested to find out, because $4 billion is a large pot. I want to know if it's effective or not. Second of all, I see in the budget there is a significant amount of resource dedicated to allow small business to grow by, and still continue to pay lower tax in the category of small business. Do you think that it's helpful, that it was the right direction?
So I think you're referring to the increase in the taxable capital limits for the small business tax rate. Yes, that's something we've been pushing for many years, because it had been sitting at 15 million. For probably 20 years or 25 years. So it needed to go up. So from 50 to 50 million was a very good step forward. What that allows, of course, is businesses that have large taxable capital, but their revenues are still under 500,000. So even though they have all this large capital in their property, like a farm implement dealer or dealership, their revenues were still under 500,000, they would lose access to the small business tax rate. So yes, I think that's going to be helpful for those businesses to potentially grow their businesses. And yes, we think that was one of the good measures of the budget.
That's great.
MP Dong, I'm sorry, we're out of time.
I have a beer question too.
Listen, go ahead. I've been very generous with the Conservatives and with Mr. Généreux, so go ahead, Mr. Dong.
Mr. Chapman.
I'll try to be fair.
I'll keep it very short. The reason why I want to ask this is my fishing buddy is a brewmaster. So over the years, he's been telling me about the nature of the business. I just want to ask you, has in the last 2-3 years, has the industry been growing in terms of craft brewers and microbrewers in terms of number? And also, is there a sort of a inner competition between the microbrewers and the craft brewers?
Yeah, I would answer that by saying before the pandemic, the small to medium-sized brewing category was growing. One thing that's unique about that segment of the market is those companies rely much more significantly on sales through their on-site tap rooms. So obviously when COVID-19 hit, there was restrictions in place for consumers to go in and enjoy a pint of draft beer. So I would say that they were more negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. We like to say in the beer industry, there's a beer for every occasion. You know, in the summer, you like a light lager. In the winter, you might like a heavy stout. So I think the competition within the category is healthy, but there are certainly challenges at the same time.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Lemire, 2 minutes 30.
Mr. Lemire, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Blackburn or Mr. Amel. I understand that you don't want to give a shock statement when you're addressing the federal government. The federal government has set aside skilled workers' files and that they voluntarily cause delays. That's a confession that we heard from the federal minister Medicino. More than 51,000 employers that are waiting in Quebec. Never has this been the case. So would you be in favor in asking the federal government of asking these 51,000 files to be resolved? It would enable all of the programs to be strengthened and work well, and people, our businesses who've invested in the system, need qualified applicants. What do you think of that? First of all, we have to open up a parenthesis here. By hearing about beer, I don't know why, but I really do feel like having a beer right now. But that being said, we could process the files that are waiting, but I would ask to need to give you more concrete examples. Yes, Mr. Lemire, we did see this statement from the federal minister in Quebec. The minister was lamenting the fact that these immigration files have been set aside. So there's this competition going on between the two governments. Who's going to be the better player? But when this information came out, this 51,000 files, both levels of government were asked, listen, can we deal with these files? Can we process these files and enable these people to remain here as permanent residents and fill these vacant jobs? This is essential. We need to do a cleanup, start from zero with new files, and these people will be able to meet the needs that we have. So this request has already been made, but we can see that Ottawa and Quebec are still arguing amongst themselves. I would add that these are human lives that are at issue here. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, and we can talk about this over a good beer. Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Mr. Mas, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. To Mr. Ban, wonder if you have any opinion on the CRTC. When it gets a directive from the minister, and I think that it could be stronger with regards to decisions based upon competition. I don't know if you have an opinion on that or whether the CRTC needs some reformation. Just curious. You don't have to answer if you don't, if it's on the spot, but just curious as to if you do have an opinion on that. I have some reservations, of course, with the directive of the CRTC. It doesn't seem that some of the decisions are consistent with telco competition, for example.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have nothing to share about that. In part because I just don't have a in-depth understanding of the CRTC process. It's not my wheelhouse. That's not my nerddom.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. And just lastly, that's actually all my questions, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the witnesses. Have been excellent today.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Mas. Je passerai la parole à Madame Gray pour...
Thank you, Mr. Mas. Ms. Gray for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple of questions for Mr. Agnew. When you went through the new budget 2022, with what you saw, were there activities or policies in there to help address inflation for small businesses? We hear that that's one of the biggest concerns out there for small businesses. And so, are you satisfied with what you saw in there regarding inflation? And can you maybe talk about that?
Yeah, so I think if you look at what's driving the inflationary pressures right now, we think it's sort of driven by a couple of factors, but certainly supply chain disruptions come to the top of the tray, as well as labor shortages. And I think on both of those issues, there was not a whole ton in it that we think will directly address the inflationary pressures. I mean, some of these things are due to market forces. But for instance, we would have liked to have seen a bit more infrastructure funding around things like the National Trade Corridors Fund, as an example.
Great, thank you. I know the Chamber in the past had said, quote, small and medium businesses are still struggling with short-term debt servicing that will hold back their ability to grow. And I was wondering if you could touch on how inflation is leading to making it more difficult to pay down debt for small businesses, and especially at this time when, as part of the study, we're looking at competitiveness as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, not to be too flippant about it, but certainly, cash is king, and businesses need to have a cash flow to pay, payroll, pay their suppliers, pay the tax man, pay the landlord, and so the more that you have inflationary pressures, you're seeing those input costs go up, and that means that there's less, cash to go around to pay these expenses, and so, having interest payments on the COVID support programs being relieved is something that we think that could demonstrably reduce those cash flow constraints on businesses.
Great, thank you. And I'll ask you a question that I had similar with another one of the witnesses with regards to interprovincial trade and specifically around red tape reduction. So I'm wondering if you can maybe speak to what you're hearing with lost opportunities of interprovincial trade and how that needs to be a priority moving forward. Breaking down
well, again, not to be too tongue-in-cheek about it, but I feel like we have a loss of direction at the moment. To be frank, we have this Canada Free Trade Agreement that doesn't seem to be going anywhere fast. Still a litany of exemptions that exist in there, and I know Ms. Gray, you previously held the trade critter portfolio, so you know all about trade exemptions, and it's a shame that we have to have a trade agreement internally so that goods and products and people can move across the border. Progress has been glacially slow. I admit the pandemic perhaps has put a dent in that, but this is a problem we faced well before the pandemic, and unfortunately it shows no signs of abating anytime soon coming out of the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask you about the previous one-for-one rule that was that seemed to be really focused on in the past, and what your thoughts were on that. If you're seeing a lot of activity around that, if you're hearing about that with your members, like if there's suggestions that you're making, or if you're getting feedback that that this is working, or if you have any other suggestions on reducing some of those other regulations that might be helpful.
Yeah, we haven't heard a whole lot on the one-to-one rule itself as of late. I mean, certainly no business is going to complain with, the administrative burden being reduced. But the one thing that we have heard about consistently that we continue to advocate for is that federal regulators need to have an economic competitiveness mandate. And, to the point that Corinne made earlier, it's not about excluding environmental or social or public safety concerns, but it's about ensuring that they have to think about economic competitiveness. I can think of one conversation I had with someone who's in a regulatory agency, and I sort of made a comment about the need to think about business impacts, and they said, it's just not in our mandate to think about those things. And so we need to make sure that regulators are told to do that, because admittedly, they're following a rule book that is set by their political masters. And so having an economic competitiveness consideration is quite important to the regulatory process here in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So we'll move to Mr. Fillmore for our last round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses that are here in person and joining us online. I want to start with a very brief parenthetical on energy, and then I'll crack into some another thing. But I want to just agree with Nathaniel Erskine-Smith. The carbon price is here to stay. The whole point of a carbon price is to change. It's a price signal to change behaviors, and people, or rather, organizations and businesses that are creating carbon pollution need to pay for that, and that's ultimately they don't want to pay for that, and that's what changes behavior. So if we rebate them everything they paid for the pollution price, it defeats the whole purpose. So there needs to be a little bit of pain there, and that's the point of it. Now it's the families and individuals that get the rebate, and that makes things better at home. And I would add that the Canadian Climate Institute said on the release of our 2030 emissions reductions plan, in every post-2030 scenario they ran, energy prices are reduced from what they are today. In every scenario they ran, they're reduced from today. So I want to separate energy from the other hardships that businesses are facing, separate energy and carbon pricing, because I think it's very different. So now I'll turn to my actual point, which is, the world has changed. We heard from the CFIB that 90% of your members are experiencing increased costs. 75% think that they're here to stay. There's wage inflation, which arguably could be a good thing. There's the cost of interprovincial trade that we're dealing with the very powerful subnational governments with. There are some things that the federal government might be able to help with, like bank and insurance fees. But the business case fundamentals have shifted for SMEs in Canada as a result of the different world that we live in now. And there's a kind of a cohort right now that's stuck in this inflection. And I want to invite, the chamber to jump in on this. We haven't heard from you and any of the other panelists. is there something here about the nature of capitalism where you have to adapt to the conditions that are before you? That, for example, Robin, you said Canada's different than other countries when it comes to competition. We're also a little bit different when it comes to what some people call zombie companies and sort of keeping companies alive that maybe whose business case fundamentals have changed substantially, and maybe it's really not their time to survive. You know what I mean? Fail fast, fail cheap, move on to the next thing, and survive. I just want to invite people into like a journey of the imagination on the changed world that we live in and how government might help businesses to adapt or accommodate that. Big question, but open it right up there.
Okay, I guess I'll go first, it is a big question in many ways and very philosophical question. And I think most people would agree that is the churn, right? Small businesses are created and lost every single day, and every year businesses come and go. The difference right now, I think, that we have to recognize is that a lot of businesses that may be struggling and near the end of their life is not because of their own, not something that they did as a company. They did everything right. But they then had to shut down. They had to do things to help society at large. And as a result, they have incurred lots of debt. They have incurred lots of stress. They have lost their employees and have to figure out how to build back. So I think that's the difference. I would completely agree with you that you have to adapt because societies change, the competition changes. That's just the nature of things, and businesses are fine with that. But when you go through a pandemic where changes were pushed onto you that created, circumstances that you couldn't control, that's where I think it's a bit different. And we have to think a little bit more about, well, how do we help businesses that may still be very viable, may still have opportunities in the future, are willing to shift and change? Thousands and thousands of businesses did. Many pivoted, shifted, did things differently throughout the pandemic. Now they're at a point where do I go back to my old ways? Do I stick with where I am? Do I go in a different direction? And a lot of businesses are doing that every single day. And I think that we're fortunate that we have those people that are willing to do that. But I think we still need to recognize that there are businesses that are struggling still because of debt. And we need to we need to be empathetic to that and think about how we can still help them get out of that. To a point, I agree. There's a point where you're going to have to say no more.
I agree with you.
Right?
I'm interested in the other part of it, which is, what do we do differently? Yes, we have to help the people in that cohort, but what else? Like, does anyone else want to jump in? Yeah.
I'd love to. Another little plug on work I've been doing. So Vivek Research did some work with Policy Horizons, which is the foresight think tank in the federal government, looking at how key technological changes may change the competition landscape. And I think that the question you're raising really points to some of the preliminary thinking we're doing on this, because with the rise of certain technologies, in particular AI, there's inevitably going to be displacement. And I mean, it's an unfortunate reality of competition that, some businesses will go extinct. And that churn is part of a healthy competitive environment. What I think we need to watch out for, though, and something that kept coming up again in our work, is that these technological advancements, they tend to have a lot of the same dynamics of business models we're seeing today, like social media platforms, like the rise of big data, where you get a snowballing effect that naturally leads to dominant firms. And so the big question I think that policymakers are going to have to grapple with is not only what are we going to do with folks that are competed out of the market, but also how do we grapple with the displacement of economic value as a result? And that includes not only small and medium-sized businesses, but also workers, right? And I think it's a bit easier to think through with workers. So if AI is going to replace my job, where am I going to go, right? And how am I going to make a living if the economic value that I used to gain from doing that job is now being captured by an AI program owned by Google? And so there's this shift in who is capturing the economic value of different activities in the market. And there is a very real reality that this economic value is going to continue to be amalgamated by large dominant digital players in our economy. And so I think that the churn is one part of the story. I think the flip side of that dynamic is, okay, where is the value that that company was generating? Where is that value gone? Who's getting that value? And how are we ensuring that that value is being shared within the economy in a way that is allowing us to meet all our needs and that is allowing all of us to participate in the economy in a autonomous, self-directed way?
Monsieur Fillmore, c'est tout le temps que vous aviez, même un peu
just 10 more
plus.
That's all the time you have, Mr. Fillmore. We've already gone behind our time limit. I'd like to thank our witnesses. This has been a very interesting meeting.
We're finishing more or less on time, which is great tonight because Mr. Chapman, I think, has given many of us thirst for a good Canadian beer. Certainly Mr. Blackburn, myself included. So thank you very much. Have a great evening. Take care, everyone. Meeting adjourned.
Merci, au revoir.